Keisha had never seen so much blood on marble floors. The old man lay at the bottom of the staircase, his breathing coming in short gasps, heart pills scattered everywhere. The mansion was empty. Whoever lived here was alone tonight. She should have just left the food and gone. Her car was dying. She was 3 hours late for her second job. Tomorrow's eviction notice was already taped to her door. But something in his eyes reminded her of her grandmother. "I've got you," she said, helping him to her Honda. The storm turned her 20-minute drive into an hour of hell. Her engine died twice. Steam poured from under the hood. By the time they reached the hospital, she knew her car was finished. The doctors said she'd saved his life. What Keisha didn't know was that the man she'd rescued had been looking for someone like her for decades, someone with her last name, someone with her heart. Everything was about to change. But even Keisha's unshakable optimism was being tested like never before. At 5:30 a.m., Keisha Williams woke up to her neighbor's baby crying through paper-thin walls. The eviction notice on her door glowed under the hallway light. Final warning: $800 behind on rent, $237 in her checking account. Her 2009 Honda Civic sat in the parking lot with a crack across the windshield and an engine that coughed like a dying animal. The mechanic had quoted $600 for repairs she couldn't afford. Without the car, she'd lose all 3 of her jobs. "Morning, beautiful," she whispered to her grandmother's photo on the nightstand. Ruth Williams smiled back from the faded picture, the woman who'd raised her after her parents died in a car accident when Keisha was 12. "Your heart's your compass, baby," Grandma Ruth used to say. "When the world gets dark, you are the light." Those words had carried Keisha through community college, through working double shifts to pay for her sociology degree, through watching gentrification price her family out of their neighborhood. But lately, being the light felt impossible when her own world was falling apart. At Sunrise Diner, Keisha tied her apron and started the coffee. The morning rush brought construction workers grabbing breakfast before their shifts, nurses heading home after 12-hour nights, and regulars like Mrs. Patterson. Mrs. Patterson has sat at table 6 every morning since her husband died 3 months ago. She ordered black coffee and wheat toast, then talked about Harold like he'd just stepped out for groceries. 42 years we were married," Mrs. Patterson said, stirring sugar into her cup. "Never spent a night apart until the cancer took him." Keisha refilled her coffee without being asked. "Tell me about your first date." "Oh, honey, Harold was so nervous he forgot his wallet. I had to pay for dinner." Mrs. Patterson's eyes lit up. "But he walked me home and promised he'd make it up to me. Took him 50 years, but he did." The manager, Dave, shot Keisha a look from behind the register. She was spending too much time with customers again, but Mrs. Patterson needed someone to listen. Keisha understood loneliness. "You remind me of my granddaughter," Mrs. Patterson said, sliding a $5 tip across the table. "Same kind heart." During her lunch break, Keisha counted the morning's tips. $23. At this rate, she'd need 4 months to catch up on rent. Her phone buzzed with a text from her friend Malik. "Still need help with car payments?" Malik worked construction and had been offering to loan her money for weeks. But Keisha couldn't take advantage of his kindness. He had his own family to support. Her afternoon delivery route for Quick Bite took her through downtown, past the gleaming office towers where she used to dream of working after college. Her sociology degree hung in her apartment like a broken promise. She'd wanted to help people, maybe work for social services or a nonprofit. Instead, she carried bags of gourmet food to people who earned more in a day than she made in a month. The irony wasn't lost on her. She delivered meals to apartments in her old neighborhood, the same buildings where her family used to live before developers bought everything and raised the rents. Now she couldn't afford to live in the place where she grew up. "Another delivery to Riverside Manor," her app announced, the richest neighborhood in the city. Keisha had never been up there, but she'd heard stories. $1-million homes hidden behind gates, the kind of wealth that seemed like another planet. Her Honda struggled up the hills, engine temperature climbing. She pulled over twice to let it cool down. At this rate, the car wouldn't last another week. Between deliveries, Keisha stopped at a gas station where a teenage girl was counting quarters for a candy bar. The girl came up 50 cents short. "Here," Keisha said, handing her $2. "Get yourself something to drink, too." "I can't," Sure you can. We all need a little sweetness sometimes. The girl smiled, and Keisha felt something lighten in her chest. Grandma Ruth was right. Being the light didn't cost money. It just cost caring. Her phone rang as she got back in the car. Unknown number. Miss Williams, this is about your student loan payments. You're 60 days past due. Keisha's stomach dropped. Another bill she'd forgotten in the chaos of trying to survive. I can make a partial payment next week. We need full payment, or we'll have to start garnishment proceedings. The call ended. Keisha sat in her car watching the sun set, doing math in her head. Even if she worked every hour she could get, there wasn't enough money. Something had to give. That night, driving home from her cleaning job at the office building, Keisha made a decision. She'd call her aunt in Atlanta. Maybe she could stay there until she got back on her feet, start over somewhere cheaper. But first, she had one more delivery to make. The app showed an order for Riverside Manor. Premium steak dinner. $80 order means maybe a decent tip. As she drove toward the hills, storm clouds gathered overhead. The weather app warned of severe thunderstorms. Her windshield wipers needed replacing. Just one more delivery, she told herself. Then tomorrow I'll figure out the rest of my life. What Keisha didn't know was that this delivery would change everything. What happened next would force Keisha to choose between her survival and a stranger's life. The storm hit like a freight train at 8:15 p.m. Hail the size of marbles pounded her windshield as Keisha drove toward Riverside Manor. The radio crackled with tornado warnings and flood alerts. Every smart person was indoors tonight. But her delivery app showed one last order. Premium steak dinner with lobster sides. $87 worth of food. If the customer tipped well, she might have enough for groceries this week. Her Honda wheezed up the winding roads into the hills. Steam started rising from under the hood again. The temperature gauge climbed into the red zone. She'd have to stop soon or risk destroying the engine completely. GPS led her through gates she'd only seen in movies. Massive estates hidden behind stone walls. Security cameras tracked her movement. Manicured lawns that probably cost more to maintain than she made in a year. 1247 Riverside Drive, her phone announced. Keisha pulled into a circular driveway that could fit 10 cars. The mansion loomed against the storm clouds. 3 stories of marble and glass with columns that belonged in a museum. But something was wrong. The front door hung wide open, swaying in the wind. No porch lights, no security lights, just darkness except for a faint glow from an upstairs window. She sat in her car, engine ticking as it cooled. Every instinct told her to leave the food by the door and run. The storm was getting worse. She was already 40 minutes late for her cleaning job at the office building. If she missed another shift, she'd be fired. But the open door bothered her. In a neighborhood like this, doors didn't just hang open during storms. Keisha grabbed the insulated bag and sprinted through the rain. Her shoes slipped on the marble steps as she reached the entrance. "Hello? Food delivery!" she called into the darkness. The foyer was bigger than her entire apartment. Marble floors reflected lightning flashes from outside. A grand staircase curved upward into shadows. Everything screamed wealth and emptiness. Then she heard it, a weak voice from somewhere inside. "Help! Please!" Keisha froze. That wasn't a customer complaint. That was desperation. "Sir, where are you?" "Here. Can't breathe." Following the voice, she found him at the bottom of the staircase, an elderly white man in an expensive navy suit lying on his side, one hand clutched to his chest. His face was gray, lips tinged blue. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the mansion's air conditioning. Scattered around him were white pills from an overturned prescription bottle. Heart medication. "Oh, God," Keisha whispered, dropping the food bag. She knelt beside him, her delivery training forgotten. "Sir, what happened? Chest. Pain," he gasped. His breathing was shallow and rapid. "Tried to get a phone upstairs. Fell." Keisha checked her phone. No signal. The storm must have knocked out the cell towers. She looked around for a landline but didn't see one in the massive foyer. The man's pulse was weak and irregular under her fingertips. She'd felt this before when Grandma Ruth had her heart attack 5 years ago. The same clammy skin, the same desperate breathing. This man was dying. "What's your name?" she asked, trying to keep him conscious. "Richard," he whispered. Richard Harrison. His watch caught her attention, not just expensive, but museum quality. A Patek Philippe that cost more than most people's cars. His cufflinks were monogrammed RH in gold. Even dying, there was something commanding about his presence. Keisha's mind raced. The landline upstairs might work, but Richard was too heavy for her to carry, and leaving him alone felt wrong. Her car could make it to the hospital, but barely. The engine was already overheating, and the storm was turning roads into rivers. And there was her cleaning job. If she missed tonight, she'd lose her last steady income. Without that job, even if she avoided eviction somehow, she wouldn't eat next week. Her phone buzzed with a text from her supervisor. "Where are you? Final warning." Richard's breathing grew more labored. His eyes found hers, and she saw the fear there. The same look Grandma Ruth had in the ambulance that night. "My daughter," he whispered. "Lives in California. Haven't spoken in 2 years. The regret in his voice broke something inside Keisha. Here was a man with everything money could buy, but dying alone during a storm, thinking about the family he'd lost touch with. Keisha made her choice. "I'm getting you to a hospital," she said, slipping her arms under his shoulders. "Right now." "You don't understand." Richard tried to protest. "Too dangerous. Your job." "My job can wait. You can't." As she helped him toward the door, lightning illuminated the mansion's entrance hall. On a side table, she glimpsed framed photos, Richard with politicians, celebrities, business leaders, a crystal award reading Humanitarian of the Year. But none of that mattered now. All that mattered was getting him to help before it was too late. What Keisha didn't know was that saving Richard Harrison's life would cost her everything she had left, and give her everything she'd ever dreamed of. But the journey to save his life would cost Keisha everything she had left. Getting Richard to her car was like moving a mountain. He was taller than she'd realized and even weakened. His frame was substantial. Each step sent shooting pains through her back as she supported his weight. "I can't let you do this," Richard breathed against her shoulder. His voice carried the authority of someone used to being in control, even now. "Too late," Keisha said, kicking open the mansion's front door. "We're doing this." The storm had turned vicious. Rain came down in sheets so thick she could barely see her Honda 20 feet away. The circular driveway had become a small lake. Hail bounced off the car's roof like gunshots. She half-carried, half-dragged Richard through the water. His expensive leather shoes slipped on the wet pavement. By the time they reached her car, both were soaked to the bone. "This thing's going to make it?" Richard asked, looking at her Honda with concern. Steam was already rising from under the hood. The engine temperature gauge sat in the red zone. The cracked windshield leaked water onto her dashboard. "It has to," Keisha said, helping him into the passenger seat. She cranked the engine. It coughed, sputtered, then caught with a sound like grinding metal. The heater barely worked, but she turned it on full blast anyway. Richard was shivering. "Closest hospital?" she asked, backing out of the driveway. "St. Mary's downtown," Richard said through chattering teeth. "But the bridge floods every storm. Adds 20 minutes with the detour." 20 minutes he might not have. Keisha looked at his face in the dashboard light, still gray, still struggling for each breath. "We're taking the direct route," she decided. The radio crackled to life. "Emergency services report major flooding on Route 9 and downtown bridges. All non-essential traffic should avoid—" Keisha turned it off. "Tell me about your daughter," she said, pressing the accelerator. The Honda protested but responded. "Sarah?" Richard's voice was fading. "Haven't talked since her mother's funeral. Said I chose business over family. She was right." Thunder crashed overhead as they descended from the hills. Keisha's windshield wipers were losing their battle against the rain. She leaned forward, squinting through the storm. What does she do? Teacher, elementary school, always wanted to help kids. Richard's head lolled against the window. Like her mother. "I was so busy building an empire, I forgot why I started." The engine temperature climbed higher. Warning lights lit up the dashboard like a Christmas tree. Keisha felt the steering wheel start to shake. "Stay with me, Richard. Keep talking." "Started from nothing," he whispered. "Food truck in the worst part of town. The woman who owned it saved my life when I was 17. Homeless, hungry, angry at the world." Something in his voice made Keisha glance over. Even in his weakened state, there was gratitude there. Deep, profound gratitude for someone who'd helped him long ago. She taught me everything, how to treat people, how to build something that matters. Then she disappeared, and I could never thank her properly. They hit downtown traffic despite the storm. Red lights stretched ahead of them. Richard's breathing was getting shallower. "We don't have time for this," Keisha muttered, checking for cops. Seeing none, she ran the red light. The Honda hit a massive pothole. Something under the hood made a grinding sound that spoke of expensive damage. The steering wheel shook violently in her hands. "This is crazy," Richard said, more alert now. "You're destroying your car, missing work, for a complete stranger." "You're not a stranger anymore," Keisha said simply. "You're someone's father, someone who needs help." Route 9 was partially flooded, just as the radio had warned. Water crept up to her door handles. The Honda's engine sputtered, died for a terrifying moment, then caught again. "I can't afford to pay for repairs," Keisha said, mostly to herself. "I can't afford to miss work. I definitely can't afford a towing bill." "Then why?" "Because my grandmother taught me that doing right isn't about what you can afford. It's about who you choose to be when nobody's watching." Richard studied her profile in the dim light. "Your grandmother sounds wise. She was everything." Keisha's voice caught. "Raised me after my parents died. Worked 3 jobs to keep us afloat. Never once complained. Never asked for help she couldn't give back somehow." "What was her name?" "Ruth. Ruth Williams." Richard went very still in his seat. Something shifted in his expression, but Keisha was too focused on driving to notice. St. Mary's emergency room appeared through the rain like a beacon. Keisha's Honda made a final terrible grinding sound and died completely in the ambulance bay. Steam poured from under the hood. She didn't care. "We made it," she said, relief flooding her voice. Paramedics rushed toward them with a gurney. Keisha helped transfer Richard, her hands steady despite everything they'd been through. "Ma'am, how long has he been experiencing symptoms?" a paramedic asked. "About an hour. Chest pain, difficulty breathing, found him collapsed." They wheeled Richard through the automatic doors. Keisha followed, still clutching the wet delivery bag she'd forgotten about. The steak dinner was cold and worthless now. In the bright ER lights, she got her first clear look at Richard. His suit was custom-tailored, probably worth more than she made in 6 months. His watch wasn't just expensive, it was the kind she'd only seen in luxury magazines. Everything about him screamed wealth and power, but all she saw was a scared man who'd almost died alone. "You saved his life," a nurse told her later. 10 more minutes and we would have lost him." Keisha nodded, exhaustion hitting her like a wave. Through the treatment room window, she could see doctors working on Richard. Monitors beeped steadily. His color was already returning. Her phone buzzed with a text from her cleaning supervisor. "Don't bother coming in tomorrow, you're fired." Then her car insurance company. "Towing fee will be $400. Payment required before vehicle release." Keisha stared at the messages, reality setting in. She'd lost her job. Her car was dead. Tomorrow's eviction was still waiting, but Richard Harrison was alive, and somehow that felt worth everything. 5. Immediate aftermath and refusal of reward, 673 675 words. But what Richard pressed into her hand would soon reveal a secret that would change everything. 3 hours later, Keisha sat in the ER waiting room, her clothes finally dry but wrinkled beyond saving. The fluorescent lights made everything look harsh and sterile. Through the treatment room window, she watched Richard speaking with doctors. His color had returned, and his breathing looked normal. She should have left hours ago. Her phone showed 12 missed calls from friends asking where she was. Her dead Honda sat in the parking lot like a monument to her terrible decision-making. But something kept her in that uncomfortable plastic chair. Maybe it was the way Richard had talked about his daughter. The regret in his voice when he mentioned choosing business over family. It reminded her of the stories Grandma Ruth used to tell about people who had everything but felt empty inside. "Miss Williams?" A nurse approached. "Mr. Harrison is asking for you." The treatment room smelled like antiseptic and hope. Richard looked smaller in the hospital gown, but his eyes were alert and focused. When he saw her, something shifted in his expression, gratitude mixed with intense curiosity. "I don't know how to thank you," he said, his voice stronger now. You sacrificed everything for a complete stranger. Keisha shifted uncomfortably. Anyone would have done the same. No. Richard's voice carried absolute certainty. They wouldn't, I know. There was weight behind those words, like someone who'd spent decades studying human nature and been disappointed more often than not. Richard reached for his wallet, a thick leather billfold that probably cost more than her monthly rent. It was stuffed with hundreds. Please let me cover your car repairs, your lost wages. I don't want your money. Keisha interrupted, backing away slightly. Richard studied her face with the intensity of someone seeing a rare specimen. What do you do for work? 3 jobs, actually. Waitress at Sunrise Diner. Delivery driver for Quick Bite. Night cleaning at office buildings. She didn't mention that she'd just lost one of them. And after tonight? Keisha's practiced smile faltered for just a moment. Her car was dead. She'd been fired from cleaning. Tomorrow's eviction loomed like a storm cloud. I'll figure it out. I always do. Richard pulled a business card from his suit jacket pocket. The paper was unusual, thick, with a subtle texture that spoke of quality. But the hospital's fluorescent lighting made the text shimmer strangely, and water damage from the storm had blurred the edges. Take this anyway, he said, pressing it into her palm. If you ever need anything at all, call that number. Keisha glanced at the card. Between the lighting and the water damage, she couldn't make out the text clearly. It looked expensive, though. She pocketed it politely. What's your address? Richard asked. I'd like to send a proper thank you. Heat crept up Keisha's neck. I'm between places right now. Something in Richard's expression shifted, understanding, then what looked like determination. Your phone number, then? She gave it to him, though she wasn't sure how much longer she could afford to keep the service active. Her last paycheck would barely cover 2 weeks of bills. You have a family? Richard asked, catching her hand as she prepared to leave. Just me now. The familiar ache settled in her chest as she thought of Grandma Ruth's photo on her nightstand. Not anymore, Richard said quietly. But Keisha was already turning toward the door, her mind on how she'd get home without a car. As she reached the exit, she noticed a black sedan pulling up to the ER entrance. Not a taxi or rideshare, something more official. The driver stepped out wearing an expensive suit despite the late hour and headed straight for Richard's room with the confidence of someone who belonged. Keisha paused, watching through the glass doors. The driver spoke briefly with a nurse, showed some kind of identification, then disappeared into the treatment area. Whatever was happening, it felt important, official. Her phone buzzed with a text from Malik. Heard about the storm. You okay? Need a ride? Keisha typed back. Long story. I'll call you tomorrow. As she waited for Malik in the hospital lobby, she pulled out Richard's business card again. The hospital's exit lighting was different, and for a moment she thought she could make out part of the text. Something about Harrison and what looked like Enterprises. But it was probably just her tired eyes playing tricks on her. Tomorrow she'd start over. Find new work. Figure out the car situation. Maybe that business card would be useful somehow. What Keisha didn't know was that in less than 24 hours, her entire life would transform in ways she never imagined possible. But in 24 hours, Keisha would discover that her life was about to change in ways she never imagined. The next morning brought Mr. Peters and his eviction crew to Keisha's door at 8 a.m. sharp. She'd spent the night on Malik's couch, her few possessions crammed into garbage bags that now sat by his front door like sad monuments to her failure. Time's up, Miss Williams, Peters said, not unkindly, but with the finality of someone who'd had this conversation too many times. I've got new tenants moving in this afternoon. Keisha had called in sick to the diner, the first time in 2 years. Her manager hadn't been happy, but what was she supposed to say? Sorry, I'm being evicted and my car died saving a stranger's life. Can I have just one more day? She asked Peters. I'm waiting on a job interview. Same story for 3 months, he replied, signaling to his crew. Nothing personal, but business is business. As the crew loaded her belongings into their truck, Keisha remembered Richard's business card. She pulled it out, hoping to see the text clearly in daylight. The card was pristine, not a drop of water damage, not a single smudge from the storm. That was impossible. Everything else from last night, her clothes, her phone, the delivery bag, had been soaked through, but this card looked like it had just come from a printer. The text read, Harrison Enterprises, Richard Harrison, Chairman and CEO. Below it, a phone number with a 617 prefix she recognized from news reports about Fortune 500 companies. Her phone rang, unknown number. Miss Williams? This is Margaret Carter, executive assistant to Richard Harrison. Mr. Harrison would like to meet with you today. A car will pick you up at noon. Keisha blinked. I'm sorry, what? Why, he'll explain everything when you meet. What's your current location? After giving Malik's address, Keisha hung up feeling more confused than before. Executive assistant, chairman, and CEO? Who exactly had she rescued last night? At 11:58 a.m., the same black sedan from the hospital pulled up outside Malik's apartment complex. The driver, professional, courteous, wearing a suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent, stepped out and approached her door. Miss Williams? I'm James. Mr. Harrison sent it to me. How did you know where to find me? Keisha asked, sliding into the leather interior. Mr. Harrison is very thorough, James replied, pulling into traffic. He's been making calls all morning. They drove through downtown toward the financial district. Keisha had walked these streets hundreds of times, but never really noticed where they were heading. Harrison Tower, a gleaming 40-story skyscraper that dominated the skyline. A banner stretched across its facade, Harrison Enterprises, 50 years of community investment. James used a special entrance that bypassed public security. They took a private elevator to the 39th floor, rising so fast Keisha's ears popped. Mr. Harrison will see you shortly, said Margaret Carter, a sharp-dressed Asian woman who led Keisha to a waiting room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the entire city. Through the glass, Keisha could see Richard in a massive corner office, speaking animatedly on the phone. He looked completely different from the dying man she'd rescued. Powerful, commanding, in his element. On his desk, she glimpsed newspapers, legal documents, and what appeared to be a thick file with her name clearly visible on the tab. A file with her name. How was that possible? The truth about who Richard really was would be just the beginning. Richard's office was a monument to success. Awards from 3 presidents lined one wall, photos with world leaders covered another. Framed newspaper headlines announced billion-dollar deals and corporate milestones. But what caught Keisha's attention was an entire wall dedicated to something different. Inner-city schools, community centers, scholarship recipients. Keisha, thank you for coming. Richard stood easily, moving far better than last night. Please sit. We have quite a lot to discuss. I still can't believe you're... this. She gestured at the opulent office, the view of the entire city below. Richard chuckled, settling into his chair. Harrison Enterprises. Started with a food truck 50 years ago, believe it or not. He pointed to a faded photograph on his desk. A young black woman standing beside a small lunch wagon with Ruth's Kitchen painted on the side. That's Ruth Williams. She gave me my first job when no one else would hire a 17-year-old kid from the projects. Keisha's blood turned to ice. What did you say? Ruth Williams. Sweetest woman I ever met. Had a granddaughter she was raising after some terrible family tragedy. I talked about that little girl constantly. Richard's eyes met Keisha's. Smart as a whip. Heart bigger than the ocean, she used to say. Sound familiar? The room seemed to tilt. Keisha gripped the arms of her chair. That's impossible. Your grandmother saved my life 40 years ago, just like you saved mine last night. Richard's voice was gentle but certain. I was homeless, hungry, angry at a world that had thrown me away. Ruth gave me work when no one else would look at me twice. He pulled out another photo, young Richard and Grandma Ruth standing together in front of the food truck, both smiling broadly. Richard looked maybe 19, wearing clothes that had seen better days but with hope in his eyes. She taught me to read financial newspapers, showed me that where you come from doesn't define where you can go. Most importantly, she taught me that how you treat people when you have nothing reveals who you really are. Keisha stared at the photo, seeing her grandmother young and vibrant, full of the same energy that had carried their family through everything. She never mentioned having a business. She never told me about you. Ruth wouldn't take credit for helping people. She'd say, Richard, I'm not doing charity. I'm investing in potential. His voice carried deep affection. When I made my first $1 million, I went back to thank her properly. The food truck was gone. The building had been torn down. Ruth had disappeared. Richard activated a wall screen showing search documents, private investigator reports, and database queries spanning decades. I've been looking for her, for you, for 20 years. Every Ruth Williams in the country, every family connection, every lead. But why? Because everything I built came from her wisdom. Richard gestured toward his empire beyond the windows. Customer service, integrity, employee loyalty, every principle that built this company came from watching Ruth Williams feed hungry people with dignity and respect. The emotional weight of it hit Keisha like a physical blow. She raised me after my parents died. Car accident when I was 12. Ruth worked 3 jobs to keep us going, never once complained. And last night, when you told me your name in the car, when you talked about your grandmother who raised you, Richard's voice carried wonder. I knew. After 40 years of searching, Ruth's granddaughter found me. He pulled out a manila folder thick with documents. The paramedics told me what you sacrificed. Your car, your job, your apartment, all to save a stranger. That's exactly what Ruth would have done. Keisha's mind reeled. But I don't understand why you were looking for us. Richard activated another screen showing architectural plans for a beautiful modern building with gardens and community spaces. The Ruth Williams Community Center. I've been planning it for 15 years. Job training, education, microfinance for small businesses, everything she believed in. The designs took Keisha's breath away. Bright classrooms, computer labs, a commercial kitchen, even a small medical clinic. I always planned to name it after her, but I wanted family permission. More than that, I wanted Ruth's granddaughter to help me run it. Keisha stood overwhelmed. Through the window, she could see her old neighborhood in the distance, the area the community center would serve. You want me to run this? The center needs an executive director, someone who understands the community because they've lived the struggle, someone with Ruth's heart. Richard joined her at the window. Last night proved you inherited her most important gift, seeing people's humanity when they need help most. He opened his desk drawer and pulled out a small, worn notebook. There's something else. Ruth kept this. Records of everyone she helped over the years. Names, stories, contact information. There are over 300 people here. Keisha's hands trembled as she took the notebook. The first entry in Grandma Ruth's careful handwriting. Richard Harrison, age 17, situation, homeless, hungry, determined, potential, unlimited, investment, job, guidance, belief. Your grandmother created a network without realizing it, Richard continued. These people, our people, they're all successful now. Business owners, teachers, nurses, mechanics, and they've been waiting 20 years to give back. Richard's voice grew excited. The community center isn't just my dream anymore, Keisha. It's theirs, too. They want to honor Ruth's memory by continuing her work. Keisha flipped through pages of Ruth's careful notes about people she'd helped. Each entry showed the same pattern, seeing potential where others saw problems, investing in humanity rather than just handing out charity. She never told me, Keisha whispered. Ruth never boasted about her impact, but she changed hundreds of lives, one person at a time. Richard's voice was thick with emotion. And now her granddaughter can help us change thousands more. But accepting Richard's offer would mean taking on more responsibility than Keisha ever imagined. Richard led Keisha to a conference room where a team of architects, lawyers, and community development specialists waited with detailed plans spread across a mahogany table that could seat 20 people. The Ruth Williams Community Center will be a $15 million project, Richard began, activating a smart wall that displayed the blueprints in stunning detail. Job training in technology, healthcare, and skilled trades, childcare for working parents, small business incubation labs, financial literacy programs. Keisha stared at the building plans. Bright, modern classrooms with floor-to-ceiling windows, computer labs equipped with the latest technology, a commercial kitchen for culinary training, workshop spaces for construction and manufacturing skills, even a small medical clinic staffed by volunteer healthcare professionals. As executive director, you'd oversee all operations, Richard continued. Starting salary, $120,000 annually, full benefits, housing allowance, and equity in the consulting firm will create to expand this model to other cities. The numbers hit Keisha like a physical force. Yesterday, she had $37. Today, someone was offering her more money than she'd ever dreamed of earning. "I don't have the qualifications." "You have the most important qualification," interrupted Margaret Carter, pulling up a presentation on the screen. "You've lived the struggle our clients face, but we won't throw you in unprepared." The presentation showed a comprehensive 6-month training program, Harvard Business School executive education, site visits to successful community centers in Chicago, Atlanta, and Detroit, leadership development with some of the country's top nonprofit executives. Richard smiled at Keisha's overwhelmed expression. "You won't be alone in this. Remember Ruth's notebook? We've contacted 50 of the people she helped. They're forming an advisory board." The screen filled with video messages from successful professionals. A restaurant owner offering culinary program space, a nurse practitioner volunteering medical services, a tech entrepreneur donating computers and training software. "Mrs. Patterson?" Keisha gasped, recognizing a familiar face among the video testimonials. "From the diner?" "Ruth helped her start nursing school 40 years ago," Richard explained. "She's been waiting to pay it forward ever since." Margaret displayed demographic studies of Keisha's old neighborhood. Current unemployment rate, 23%. High school graduation rate, 67%. Single-parent households, 45%. These aren't just statistics. They're your neighbors who need exactly what Ruth would have offered. The plans included partnerships with local schools for dual enrollment programs, apprenticeships with union trades, and microfinance loans for aspiring entrepreneurs starting their own businesses. "We project serving 500 people in year 1, 2000 by year 3, explained Dr. Sarah Kim, the economist on Richard's team. "Average income increase for participants, 85%. New businesses created, approximately 50 annually." Richard opened another folder showing a beautifully designed apartment. "You'll live in the director's residence above the center, fully furnished, all utilities included, overlooking the community garden where residents can grow their own food." He slid a contract across the table. "Your current debts, your car situation, your back rent, all handled immediately. Consider it an investment in the center's leadership." Keisha's throat tightened. "This feels like charity." "It's business," Richard said firmly. "Smart business. Community investment generates measurable returns, economic, social, and personal. Ruth understood that before it became trendy in corporate boardrooms." He showed her economic studies from similar projects nationwide. Communities with strong job training centers see 15% increases in property values, 30% reduction in crime rates, 40% increase in small business formation. Margaret pulled up the final presentation slide, a map of the United States with dozens of locations marked in red. "If our pilot succeeds, and with you leading it we believe it will, we'll franchise this model nationwide. You'd oversee national expansion as chief operating officer." "Why are you all so confident in me?" Keisha asked, looking around the room at expectant faces. "Because Richard Harrison hasn't been wrong about people in 30 years, Margaret replied. "And because Ruth Williams saw something special in you before you could even walk." Richard leaned forward. "Construction starts in 60 days. Your training program begins next Monday. You'll spend 2 weeks each at our partner centers, learning what works and what doesn't." He handed her an official offer letter in a leather portfolio. "Take the weekend to decide, but Keisha, this project is happening with or without you. The question is whether Ruth's granddaughter will help us honor her legacy the right way." The weight of responsibility settled on Keisha's shoulders. "What if I fail? What if I'm not ready for something this big?" "Ruth wasn't ready to run a business either," Richard said gently. "She was a single mother working factory jobs when she started that food truck. But she had something more valuable than experience. She understood people." He pointed to Ruth's photo on the wall. "Your grandmother didn't quit when things got difficult. She fed people when she was hungry herself. She invested in others when she had nothing to spare." Keisha held the offer letter, feeling its weight. Through the conference room windows, she could see her old neighborhood in the distance, blocks of struggling families, boarded-up businesses, dreams deferred by circumstances beyond anyone's control. "If I say yes," she asked slowly, "what happens to the people who need help tomorrow while we're building and planning and training?" Richard's face broke into the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. Now that's exactly what Ruth would have asked. He activated one final screen showing mobile unit designs. The Ruth Williams Mobile Resource Center. Food assistance, job placement, emergency aid. Launches next week operating from retrofitted food trucks. He paused meaningfully. Full circle. The room fell silent as everyone waited for her answer. But the real test would be whether the community would embrace what Keisha and Richard were building. 6 months later, Keisha's life looked like someone else's dream. Her morning routine had completely transformed. Instead of 3 alarm clocks and overdue bills scattered on her nightstand, she woke to architectural updates and program enrollment reports. Harvard Business School textbooks replaced collection notices. Her apartment above the nearly completed community center overlooked gardens where residents grew vegetables and children played. At 7 a.m., she stood in the main construction area, hard hat on, discussing timeline adjustments with contractors. Many of them were local residents, part of Richard's commitment to neighborhood hiring. The building rose from what had been an empty lot, its solar panels gleaming in the morning sun. "Miss Williams," called out 17-year-old Marcus, one of their first apprentices, "the electrical crew wants to know about the computer lab outlets." Keisha smiled, remembering when she'd been his age with no clear path forward. "Tell them we're future-proofing for whatever technology comes next." The mobile unit program had exceeded every expectation. 3 bright yellow food trucks, each bearing Ruth's smiling face, served breakfast in different neighborhoods each morning. Malik coordinated the program, having completed his construction management certification through their pre-opening training. "We've placed 127 people in permanent jobs," he reported during their weekly team meeting. "Average wage increase of 78%, and Miss Patterson's nursing program has a waiting list." Mrs. Patterson had become their volunteer medical training coordinator, teaching basic healthcare skills in a temporary classroom setup. The local news had featured her story, from diner regular to community hero. The network from Ruth's notebook had come alive in ways that amazed everyone. Restaurant owners created apprenticeship programs. A tech entrepreneur donated not just computers, but ongoing technical support. A bank president personally managed their microfinance initiative for small business startups. By month 4, unexpected ripple effects began appearing. State representatives toured the facility, taking detailed notes. A federal grant application sat on Keisha's desk. $2.3 million for program expansion. Major employers started posting job openings specifically for center graduates. The local high school created a dual enrollment program allowing students to graduate with both diplomas and professional certifications. 3 neighborhood businesses that had been closed for years reopened due to increased foot traffic from center activities. Keisha's own transformation was remarkable. She'd gone from asking for help to being sought out for advice. Community center directors from Chicago, Atlanta, and Detroit called weekly, sharing strategies and seeking guidance. Harvard Business School requested a case study. Urban planning conferences invited her as a keynote speaker. Media coverage escalated from local to national. The Ruth Williams model, "Can Kindness Be Scaled?" appeared in major magazines. Policy experts studied their approach. City Council passed the Ruth Williams Community Investment Act, providing tax incentives for similar projects citywide. The numbers spoke for themselves. 127 permanent job placements with an 89% retention rate after 6 months. 34 new small businesses launched. 156 people enrolled in continuing education. 67 families moved above poverty-level income. 12 neighborhood businesses reopened. But the real impact showed in smaller moments. Children playing in the garden where Ruth's memorial bench sat, surrounded by tomatoes and herbs. Teenagers coding in the computer lab, designing apps to solve community problems. Adults in the commercial kitchen, preparing for food service certifications while cooking meals for their families. 15 cities had expressed interest in replicating the model. Franchise agreements were being drafted. Keisha's wall map showed potential locations from Portland to Miami. The grand opening was scheduled for the 1-year anniversary of the storm that had changed everything. Richard visited weekly, watching the transformation with satisfaction that went beyond business success. "Ruth would be proud," he said during one visit, observing Keisha coordinate between kitchen staff and job counselors with the confidence of someone born to lead. Corporate partnerships flowed in naturally. A medical equipment company relocated to be near their trained workforce. Technology firms recruited directly from their coding boot camp. Construction companies competed to hire their apprentices. Academic recognition followed. Harvard requested detailed case studies. Urban planning schools assigned their approach as required reading. Policy researchers cited their model in congressional testimony about community development. The breakthrough moment came when Sarah Harrison, Richard's estranged daughter, flew in from California after seeing national news coverage. She spent 3 days at the center, working alongside volunteers, watching her father interact with residents. "I see why you do this now," she told him last evening. "I see Mom's influence, and I see Ruth's." The reconciliation happened quietly, over dinner in the center's kitchen while Keisha taught cooking classes nearby. Some wounds needed time and shared purpose to heal. As opening day approached, the center buzzed with final preparations. Local artists completed a mural depicting Ruth's food truck surrounded by faces of people she'd helped. The main hall featured photos showing the progression from empty lot to thriving community hub. Keisha stood in the main hall holding Ruth's photo, surrounded by construction workers putting finishing touches on what had become more than a building. It was proof that one person's kindness could multiply across decades and transform an entire community. The circle was nearly complete. 1 year later, the circle of kindness Ruth started would complete in a way no one expected. The grand opening day arrived with perfect weather. The Ruth Williams Community Center gleamed in morning sunlight, solar panels catching the rays, gardens bursting with vegetables, children's laughter echoing from the playground that had been built where the empty lot once stood. Hundreds of people gathered for the dedication ceremony. Local families mixed with city officials, business leaders, and media representatives. The banner stretched across the entrance read, "Ruth Williams Community Center, where second chances become new beginnings." Keisha stood at the podium wearing a professional blazer but still greeting everyone personally. She'd learned to balance authority with accessibility, a skill Ruth would have admired. "My grandmother used to say, 'Baby, your heart's your compass,'" Keisha began, looking out at the faces that represented a transformed community. She never knew her simple kindness would grow into this. She unveiled the bronze dedication plaque, in memory of Ruth Williams, who fed the hungry, lifted the fallen, and believed that one person's compassion can change the world. The crowd applauded, but Keisha held up her hand. Ruth's story doesn't end there. An elderly black woman stepped forward from the crowd, elegant despite using a walking cane with eyes identical to Keisha's. Gasps rippled through the audience. "Everyone, I'd like you to meet my great-aunt, Dorothy Williams, Ruth's younger sister." Dorothy had been living in a nursing home 3 states away when she saw news coverage of the center's success. She'd recognized Ruth's photo immediately and contacted Richard's office. "Ruth always said kindness was contagious," Dorothy said, her voice carrying despite her age. "She just never knew how far it would spread." The surprise continued. Dorothy revealed that Ruth had kept detailed records spanning 40 years, not just the notebook Richard found, but dozens of journals documenting everyone she'd helped. She called it her investment portfolio. Dorothy smiled. Keisha announced the launch of Ruth's Legacy Fund, a program where center graduates committed to helping one person annually, creating an endless chain of support. The first graduate stepped forward, Malik, now running his own contracting business. "Last week, I hired a homeless teenager, gave him the same chance Ruth gave Richard, Richard gave Keisha, and Keisha gave me." Storm clouds gathered as the ceremony ended, the first since that life-changing night. But this time, everyone simply moved inside to continue celebrating. The center was designed for this, with spaces that brought people together regardless of weather. Richard joined Keisha by Ruth's memorial bench as the last guests filtered inside. "Think she would be proud?" Keisha touched the bronze plaque, then looked up at the building full of laughter and connection. "I think she's probably organizing a potluck in heaven and wondering why we took so long." The storm passed quickly, as summer storms do. When people emerged, they were exchanging phone numbers, making plans, building relationships that would outlast any building. The center emptied, but the connections remained, exactly as Ruth would have wanted. Above them, the lights in the director's apartment glowed warmly. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new people to help, new opportunities to prove that kindness multiplied creates miracles. Ruth's compass had pointed them all toward hope. Ruth Williams never set out to change the world. She just decided to help one hungry teenager, but that single act of kindness, multiplied by choice after choice to care for others, created ripples that are still spreading 50 years later. Today, somewhere in your community, there's someone who needs exactly what you can give. Not money or fame or recognition, just human kindness. Maybe it's the coworker eating lunch alone. The neighbor is struggling with groceries. The stranger whose car broke down in the rain. You have no idea whose life might change forever because you chose compassion over convenience. You might be feeding the next person who'll transform your entire community. Ruth's compass was simple. Let your heart guide you toward kindness. Where will your compass point you today? If this story inspired you to spread a little more kindness in the world, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to believe in second chances. Because every story of transformation starts with someone who cares enough to help. What act of kindness will you do today? Tell us in the comments below.